We should be live. This is issue 752 on PM repo. Since their call number 106. Relatively light scheduled agenda. Obviously, if you have points to bring up in different categories, by all means. We'll get started off with Capella, which I believe is just a little bit over 1 week from now. What's the precise date?
April 12th.
Less than a week.
22:27 UTC. I forget what the epoch number is.
Cool. If you are listening and you run infrastructure or nodes or validators, now's the time. Upgrade. Perry, we had mainnet shadow fork 3 this morning, right? Anything to report here?
Yeah, it's been looking really great so far. We had 2 builders on the network this time. I haven't heard back from one, but the other one is producing blocks. We are noticing a couple of unable to verify signatures, but still looking into why. Besides that, healthy block production, all client combinations made it through. And we use mainnet releases for everything. We also tried a couple of the standard procedures, like deposits were made, a couple of withdrawals were done with 0x0 credentials, a couple with 0x1, and yeah, just playing around with that sequence. And everything looks good so far.
Cool. The signatures that you can't verify, those are blocks?
Those are MEV-Boost stuff, MEV-Boost signatures, I think.
Okay, interesting. Cool. Anything else on this? Any questions for Perry? Okay, thank you. And anything else on Capella before next week? Great. Good work, everyone. Excited to see it go through. Deneb. There are no scheduled discussion points for Deneb this week. There's been.
I have something that I wanted to put on the agenda but forgot. I would like to modify the Blob transaction type from 0x5 to 0x3. I think it was chosen in that way because there were some different transaction types on some layer 2s or something. I don't think we should create the expectation that mainnet will care about transaction types on other networks. And I would like to modify the transaction type.
Yeah, on this, I think it would be good to have like maybe a high bit set for non-mainnet so that there's like just a different space that people could use as a standard. Yeah, I see the point. Oscar?
Yeah, I mean, I was basically going to echo a similar sentiment. I feel like this is something where we should probably sooner than later start some sort of standardization procedure. I mean, ideally, there should also be like non-conflicting standards between layer 2s, but maybe we don't care so much. But yeah, it does seem like a bad precedent to set to just skip versions on mainnet because, I mean, we can't really keep doing that. So, but still, we should look into standardizing this.
Yeah, there is a little bit of precedent here, at least in the consensus layer. I just shared a link to domain types from phase 0. There is domain application mask, which essentially just says if you're going to use the application layer and you're going to utilize the same signing scheme, set this bit and you won't run into mainnet conflicts. So, you know, I don't. Does that surface as an EAP, ERC? I'm not exactly sure, but I think it'd be nice.
Just a sanity check, do we have specific feedback by any either layer 2s or wallets on whether this would cause massive problems or anything in this specific case?
I have no feedback, but I also don't know why this was chosen this way. exactly why this was chosen this way. I think it was there was some code in Aragon, so maybe the Aragon team can comment on it.
Proto?
Yeah, just to call out to any L2 chain similar to the chain IDs that we are pretty much standardized. We should do a better effort at standardizing transaction types and domains and whatnot. I think Optimism uses one transaction type soon, and so does Arbitrum, or at least I think they use up to 7 transaction types. And then
I'm
there's some
not
more
so
chains that all
sure.
use chains.
I'll have to check.
And yes,
So
Anscar also precompiles.
Right. Is this something, Marius, does this have a EIP PR as well?
Yes, it has a consensus spec PR and an EIP PR.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with not trying to deal with conflicts because we're not going to be able to resolve it, and that's setting the precedent here that we just do sequential and mainnet makes sense. Maybe it's merge these PRs, shout into the void, and see if it's going to cause a deeper issue than we expect. Rather than, I think merging the PR sends a stronger signal than trying to just knock on some doors and see what's up. Especially considering we still have some lead time on this.
Yeah, I think the only thing about merging these PRs is the question. Like, what's the status of the test nets? Is it fine to just merge it right now, or should we wait for another round of, like, I don't know, changes? But,
yeah, I mean, on the consensus layer side, we'd have to do a release, and pretty much the testnet would target either the current release, which has 0x5, or the next release, which could have 0x3. As for the testnets on the EIP EL side, you know, I think it's more targeting a commit or targeting head. So we would just have to send the signal, but it seems easy enough to change, unless, except for maybe Aragon or others that have other types of transactions that would conflict, and we don't know the complexity there.
so the way I understood it from Roberto is that even Aragon removed this code, they removed the transaction type 3 that they had in their code base. So maybe it's not even an issue anymore.
Okay, so there's like potentially a little bit of coordination effort to like circle back with the testnet schedule and decide if these could go into next or the following, but seems like general agreement to plant a flag here and merge these. Anything else on this one? Thank you, Marius. Other DNAB related discussions? I apologize. I was traveling on Monday. I am curious just like general state of Blob decoupling networking work. If that's becoming relatively feature complete, or if that's still like a very active R&D for teams.
I can give a quick update. Go ahead, sorry.
Terrence,
Go
I think
ahead.
you're on.
Okay, sorry.
And yeah, I can give a quick update on the Prism side of things. So we were able to implement all the gossip features. We have been working on blobs by range and blobs by root, and we have successfully tested that yesterday. So that seems to be working. The only thing that we don't have is backfilling, but I don't think that's like a testnet blocker. That's gonna take us a few weeks, if not months, to implement backfilling. So I think like Prism can probably pair with any client right now to start testing that. So that's where we are.
In Lighthouse right now, we're working on like the single blob lookups and integrating that with like our pre-processing functionality and like generally in block processing. I'd say that's the big remaining feature for us. In parallel, we're trying to work on like just a testable version of Lighthouse that could run on a local testnet. So we start like actually testing some stuff. That's generally where we're at.
Cool. Was the complexity generally as expected, or were there unknowns and continued worries here?
I would say as expected so far, where it's like a bit of a pain, but it's nothing unsolvable.
Cool.
Lodestar is sort of ready to interop with any other client, and Ethereum JS on the EL side is also sort of ready. And what I'm currently changing in Lodestar is the signing communication between Beacon and the validator to change into block contents from the earlier independent blob and block signing. So that should anyway be ready by end of this week. But anyway, it's not really a blocker to participate in any DevNet since it's internal between Lodestar and Validator as of now.
An update from Tego. We are still in developing phase. We are concentrating mostly on the API side for signing, plus the logic for caching and looking up missed gossip to reconstruct the bundles of blob sidecar and blocks while we are following the head. So all the complexity of handling caching and pools of objects, and then complete the block import. We have still work to do, so we are not ready for any interop at the moment.
Thanks. Regarding Deneb, any other items to discuss? Easy enough. Actually, there's something on my mind on Capella with the historic roots revamp. We essentially have historic roots list that starts at Capella. We don't have it full, and we were talking about once that it becomes fixed, essentially once you finalize the Capella update, you could in a future fork have a fixed list that you can insert and essentially utilize the new historic roots mechanism fully from Genesis. That was mentioned as a potential future item. That does seem like a pretty low-hanging fruit. Is there an appetite for specifying that and getting that into Deneb? It's a bit of a question for Yasik as well, because I think he was eager to do so. But is there any gauge of sentiment on that? Essentially, like left as a to-do from the last upgrade, and wondering we should tackle that to do here. Okay, I'll circle back with Yasik and maybe just put it up as a feature spec for discussion, and then we can, once it's complete, decide where to insert it. Anything else on Deneb?
As we are with some to-do lists for the NOP, I am recalling something that about slashed validators and the GAT beacon proposer, and probably some other miscellaneous things that at some point in time we have decided probably to put into the NOP. I'm just wondering, are we still going to do that? At least for this GAT beacon proposer thing.
Was get beacon proposer essentially filters out slash validators in the selection process so that you end up with
Yeah.
more full selection of blocks? Yeah, I mean, I think there's probably room for a couple of small non-cross layer items, but they would probably need to be bubbled up very quickly. You know, next time active discussion, decisions soon.
Yeah, like just probably it's not super critical thing, right? So we can do it after the fork, after the NOP. So I'm just wondering if it makes sense to or concurrently, or just make more sense to defer it to the next one. That's my kind of question.
Yeah, I mean, my general answer is probably along with a major feature. If there are cleanups and minor items, especially when they're not cross layer, there's probably room for a couple, and that we can't always push them off, or we're never going to do them. So we should refine those specs and have the conversation, and if not, make a more stronger commitment to them being in the next work. Okay. Other discussion points on Deneb? Okay. On research spec, etc., I did toss up a PR from DapLion, this general design that he and I were discussing on validator index reuse. I brought it up not as a necessary point to decide where it goes into a fork or not, but to gauge general sentiment here. I've heard two arguments. One is it is really nice to reuse indices and not have big gaps, or not have gaps form, and from an engineering perspective, but also that the counter argument is you can probably handle this with some engineering complexity and not necessarily put it into the spec. I just wanted to get some eyes on this and get a general feeling on if this, which is a relatively minor feature, is worthwhile from the perspective of client engineers. And if you don't have comments today, I just want to bubble it up to potentially leave comments in the PR. Nonetheless, this will probably emerge soon. It's under _features, so it's not slated for a fork, but it's at least we're good at feature complete for discussion. No comments? Okay. We're kind of getting to the end of the list of our agenda. Does anyone have anything else to talk about?
I can give a quick update about what happened with the MEV-Boost release earlier this week.
Yeah, that'd be great.
All right, so let me post the postmortem here that we posted 2 days ago. On Monday, a proposer attacker tried to steal a block from a relay to unbundle and then change the transactions and propose that to make a ton of money. It took slashing into account, obviously, and they managed to do this by sending an invalid beacon block with a 0 state root. And at this point, the beacon, the CL clients, they used to broadcast before validate. So the relay sent this block to the beacon node, but the beacon node found it to be invalid. So the proposer could receive the response from the relay and didn't have to raise a second block because that was invalid and for some reason not propagated quickly enough, because actually it should have been. In the end, they managed to steal a ton of money from sandwiching bots, and then they turned off their validators, and that was it. As a response of that, we changed 2 things on the release in coordination with the other release as well. There is a get payload cutoff time that is around like 4 seconds now, that if proposers try to request late into the slot, the payload won't be returned. And more importantly, now the CL clients that we use, they use to validate before broadcasting. Because standard CL behavior is broadcast and then validate. But for the relays, we really need the CL client to validate the payload before broadcasting. But this introduces additional latency, of course, about 300 to 700 milliseconds for the validation before it gets broadcast. And this pushes the broadcast time of a block further out. On top of this,
are you doing full validation, including the execution layer?
I think the CL clients do that. Our relay, at least, already validates the execution payload when we receive the payload submission. I think CL clients also do that. I'm not 100% sure. But this all together, and that Terence Potus, maybe you can chime in here.
Yeah, so since then we have provided a patch such that we don't have to do EL validation. In particular, the method that we're using to validate before broadcast is rather slow because it touches 4 choices: state with the state and the block to the DB. We don't need to do that. So since then, we have provided a patch that just does CL consensus rule validation only, and that is going to be much faster. I think this is going to be tested right now and get installed before the relayer is willing to just use that validation.
Okay, yeah, that's what I was gonna get at, is that there's probably a lot you can carve out there if you need to do some validation only.
Yeah, totally. And we definitely want to have code that is as performant as it can get here to reduce the latency before broadcasting. But all things together, that the proposer can request the payload a bit into the slot, like this is like 1 second, 1.5 seconds, sometimes even, and then the validation delay before broadcasting, it pushes the broadcast timing kind of into the slot further. And we're seeing now unusual amounts of orphaned blocks. Right now, it's about, I think, 4 an hour, up from like, I think, 10 a day or so, because multiple relays have the issue that with the validation latency and other latencies and more aggressive orphaning behavior by CL clients too, that the blocks they're just getting out so late that we're seeing a lot more orphaning right now.
Yeah. Question: are we seeing? Are these because people are beginning to make their
one second, I'm back in a
MEV-Boost?
moment.
Sorry. Chris, did you say you'd be back in 1 moment? I apologize. I missed that.
Yeah, I'm very sorry. My kids just had an accident and started screaming next to me.
Got it. Are you back and available, or are you taking a moment?
Yeah, I would say I'm back.
Okay. Are these due to proposers beginning the MEV-Boost dance late into the slot? Are these orphans happening in relation to people who are actually beginning the MEV-Boost dance at the start of the slot? My worry is that people who have deviated from honest behavior, sending a block at the start of the slot, into more rational behavior, waiting to try to get more MEV, are the ones that are being orphaned here, and that such actors who are rational and modify their behavior will modify their behavior and make the calls earlier in the slot. So I'm just wondering if this is like an issue for honest validators or for rational deviant validators. Because if it's the latter, I wouldn't worry too much and they're going to change their behavior.
Can you repeat the question real quick?
Yes. Is this a problem for honest validators that are making the calls to MEV-Boost at the start of the slot? Or is this a call for rational deviant validators that are calling, MEV-Boost at 2 seconds into the slot to try to get more MEV? If it's the latter, I wouldn't necessarily worry too much, because they will tune their behavior to call earlier. But if it's the former, I would worry, because now essentially that's showing that there is too much latency in the comms.
Yeah, we are still monitoring and investigating. Yeah, we will follow up with more data. I think even for like all CL clients are configured to start the flow at t equals 0, but there can be a number of reasons for additional latencies here. Just a bad network connection can make the get header request slow and then already start late. And then by randomness, the validation is a bit slower than usual.
Right.
And suddenly things get pushed back really far out.
Yeah, understood. Potas?
Right, so perhaps I can say a little bit about this, the thing with delays. Even before this incident, we were tracking reorgs because not only Lighthouse, but now Prism is also trying to reorg late blocks. We've been mostly successful. We've seen some problems on slot 1. So when the second slot of the epoch tries to reorg the first block on the epoch, because the first block was late, then Prism has an issue in that particular situation, which does happen a little bit often because the first slot of the epoch, the first block of the epoch oftentimes is late. After the relayers started posting these patches, we are seeing much more reorgs. I mean, it's clear now we have more missing slots. And I do suspect that unless this is changed, the situation is going to get worse and worse. The delays they're talking about is over 1 second to 2 seconds. So this is essentially like a coin flop on each block the relayer is sending, whether or not it's going to be reorged or not. I strongly advise to look in this patch that Terence said that they're soaking, because the difference seems to be between 1 to 2 seconds currently on the validation to just 100 milliseconds afterwards. And with 100 milliseconds, I think we're absolutely safe.
Got it. And Chris, you're claiming 400 to 600 milliseconds. Is that that's just the? Do you have very highly resourced machines? Like when we say 1 to 2 seconds, are we talking about 2 different types of machines here?
Yeah, I think it depends on what type of validation. But in general, like we're seeing like 400 to 600 milliseconds validation delay on the beacon node, and ultrasound they have maybe a bit less even. But if you can get that down to 100, that would be amazing. And
you also need to recall that, I mean, the time that makes the cut for us to reorg is not the time that we receive the block, is the time when we put it in port choice, which happens after our own validation. So, and that's the validation on the computer of the validators, not on might not be a large computer. So even if you send the block at 3 seconds, that takes over 1 second to execute, that's a coin flop, a coin toss.
I do think the providing more visibility into honest late reorgs would be valuable, because I do think that a number of entities might have begun trying to modify behavior to get and broadcast late, and that this combined with modified relay behavior is maybe amplifying the problem. And so these actors will probably figure out themselves, but just making clear that essentially there's a modification that is utilized by the majority of the network, I think would help.
yeah, I totally agree. This is certainly something that is pretty interesting and important to monitor and to keep an eye out, and to think about possible ways to mitigate and that have also as little as possible negative impact on solo stickers by increasing just regular missed slots, for instance. We are with the other relays. I know ultrasound relay is also very active on monitoring their numbers and their performance and the missed slots and everything. And we are working together with the other relays to improve the parameters and the situation over time, to collect more data and keep an eye on it. There will also be more data coming out from this. Yeah, and we are working on unshot hardening the MEV-Boost flow overall, and analyzing potential attack vectors that could be possible. By the way, one more thing here is that it would be really interesting to get more security research on the MEV-Boost relay code base. There was an audit and there were a bunch of people looking at it, but yeah, there is maybe interest in having a more coordinated, wider bug bounty program that is not solely funded by Flashbot, but more of an industry-wide thing, maybe.
On specification of the proposer boost reorgs, that's landed in a PR. in limbo for quite a while, but now, something like 70% of the network will be utilizing it. Any opposition to shifting that into spec, even if there is a note that it's optional behavior? It's Marius.
Yeah, so I'm not opposed to shifting MEV-Boost into the spec, but I would like to make clear that this bug wasn't an issue with MEV-Boost, but it was with the relayer. And so it kind of feels like, I don't know, Flashbot or the relay service providers have failed their users, the builders, and are kind of trying to pawn this on everyone else. So I would like to make sure, like, I don't oppose doing MEV, like putting the MEV-Boost software into like the general bug bounty program, but I very much oppose painting this as something that was like an Ethereum fault or something. This was definitely an issue of these service providers and not of like the general Ethereum ecosystem.
Yeah, thank you. Just to clarify, I was asking, there's a specification point in the fork choice that's hanging out in a PR that has not been merged for quite a while, even though most now the majority of the network is utilizing it. So I guess there's two discussion points there. One is how to provide MEV-Boost with a better bug bounty, and then also secondary questions of relay bounties and other things like that. And the other is the fork choice proposer boost reorgs into specification.
Yeah, again, same argument. I think this part is like MEV-Boost is part of the core, and it should be specified and standardized and spec'd out.
When here I would say MEV-Boost is somewhat spec'd with the builder specs already. What kind of like different spec would you be thinking about?
Yeah, just to make it clear, Marius, their builder specs are under the /Ethereum org and are well specified and well standardized. And those are the maybe poorly named as I look at it, but those are the communications with how to deal with talk to MEV-Boost. So I think that is well specified at this point. Okay, on Polar Press 3034, which is the late reorg specified by Michael Sproul, it again seems strange that is not part of the spec at this point if that's the behavior, even if it is optional behavior. So let's do a pass on that and make consideration over the next week or two on if and how to finally put that into the spec. Okay. Yeah, this is other thing. There's a number of active conversations around MEV-Boost, around safe relay behavior, around equivocations and other things. So I don't think this is necessarily done, but it'd be good to get the optimization, and that helps with latencies and to continue to monitor. Is there any other discussion points related to this incident or MEV-Boost in general? Potus?
Yeah, so there was a question that perhaps it's good to gauge here. One of the options was for clients to provide an endpoint that you would submit a blinded block and it would just tell you if it's valid or not, just by checking the consensus validity of the block. And this was our first reaction of something that we would want to have, because having the relayers forking CL clients and having a Prism fork and a Lighthouse fork is not a good status quo. And I myself, I'm divided about this. I'm not really sure if this is something that we want to have, if it has to be specified or not. I initially disagreed on having this specified. Paul Hauner, I don't know if Paul is here, but Paul seemed to agree that this should be something that we would want to have. And I just wanted to have this discussion here.
Yeah, I mean, my intuition is that if we don't, then there will be a subset of clients that are used by relays instead of a diversity of clients that support the behavior. And the behavior will not necessarily be standardized, or will be de facto standardized, whereas the RPC endpoint would certainly standardize it. So it doesn't seem, it seems like one of those things that if we don't do, we end up in a worse spot. And if we do, then we're kind of like adding this very specific behavior for this use case, but knowing, which is a bit strange, but knowing that it prevents the actualization of a bunch of strange and modified behavior.
Right. So my worry is that, like, by adding things that make the situation to continue on, sort of like diverting us from realizing that we need PBS and protocol, and facilitating the continuation of the status quo is not something that I'm happy about. But I also agree that, like, having relayers forking Prism and trying on production, testing on production, the Prism patches or Lighthouse patches is not good either.
Yeah. I guess the counter argument to that is MEV-Boost exists and it's not going to go away tomorrow. So there are leaving the issues to just stand there, leaves the system in a more fragile place, because that is the practical nature of the system today. And if this were a matter of like, okay, are we going to do and try and PBS in 3 months because we're not going to shore up the system, then sure, maybe, but I don't think anyone's discussing timelines like that. So the band-aids seem necessary.
Wouldn't we need something like this blinded block consensus verification endpoint if we had PBS?
Yeah, I
you
think
wouldn't necessarily have it as an
this would be
RPC.
probably something needed for PBS. So for PBS, probably we will need some sort of validation of the block, which is pure consensus anyways. So this endpoint would be needed.
You need the workflow. You wouldn't necessarily be using the endpoint, right? Because you'd get that message from Gossip and you'd be doing consensus things on it to decide if you need to do an attestation to that like subcomponent of the block. So yes, you need the workflow. No, I don't think you'd need the RPC. But even then, that's a reasonable additional argument.
Yeah, I don't know. It's like, I kind of like the idea of having a separate endpoint, but it's also kind of for a pretty specialized purpose then, for like everyone to have to support it. Yeah, I don't know.
And
even if all the clients implement it, I don't know if there will be in any case some super specialized logic to super optimize that endpoints, because it seems that every millisecond matters here. So does this prevent in any case having specialized fork for super optimize that one?
Yeah, hard to say. But it at least allows the default relay behavior to pick up a client and just do it rather than having to fork something. Obviously, hard to say what these highly incentivized actors will ultimately do. Is anybody willing to specify the endpoint in the PR for further discussion?
I can like in the next couple of weeks probably, but right now I feel like I got a lot of the network on my plate. It almost seems like this should be a part of the builder specs, even though at that point it sort of becomes like the builder specs are half execution, half consensus.
Why is this part of the builder specs? Because this is the functionality presumably a relay would be calling.
Yeah, like a relay implements the builder specs should be like yeah, I guess it's more of like an internal API for the relay.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean I think the consensus APIs is the place, because it's a functionality that a particular user needs, a particular use case needs. You could obviously in the builder specs have some notes about the things a relay could or should be doing in between places in the communications, but I don't think that's where you'd actually specify the RPC.
I think we should maybe consider the standardization in next week again or so, because there may be additional checks that we wanted as part of this flow too.
Yeah, that sounds good.
I just wanted to say thanks for everybody involved in chiming in into the analysis, into mitigation, into helping chart the path forward and keeping an eye on the data. It was a huge team effort. And yeah, also thanks for giving this room here. And I apologize that I just had a little small children incident in between and got totally unfocused.
Okay, thank you very much. We will bubble up at least that discussion point for next week and can discuss any other updates that have come since then. Let's see, nothing else on the agenda today. Are there any other items people would like to discuss before we close? Okay. I believe there are at least a couple watch parties for Capella. Everyone upgrade your nodes and happy fork.
Thank you.